The war is over. The planes are put away. The men who served in the Navy, the Army, and the Air Force are looking for peacetime jobs. During the time British forces were based in the Southwest Pacific, over 4,000 men and women, mainly from the Navy, applied to take their discharge in Australia. As they fill in their application forms, men like Patrick Oliver, who served on the battlefronts of 4 oceans, look towards Australia as a country in which they have a hope and a future. They see new industries springing up, industries in which they can find permanent jobs and security. The living steel of Australia, hammered into new shapes of peacetime production. They see men working a 5-day week, with wages and conditions fixed by Australia's arbitration system, a system that hears employees and employers alike. They take their place beside Australian workers in industries that are both old and new to the Commonwealth. It was in a dehydration and quick freezing factory, processing many tons of vegetables a day, that Patrick Oliver found his job. At knock-off time, there's a general move towards the change rooms. Today, a union meeting has been called. It's the job of the trade unions to look after wages, hours of work, and fair treatment. The Department of Labour and Industry sees that working conditions in all factories comply with fixed minimum standards. At the factory where Pat works, domestic questions are discussed as they arise by unionists and management in the factory canteen. During one of these meetings, the shop steward announces that Pat Oliver's application has been approved by the state branch, and Pat is welcomed as a new member of the union. The barmaid at the Iron Duke knows the men from nearby factories who come after work for their pot of beer. There's John Stanley. He's got a house at last for his family. And Pat, who's had difficulty in having a new suit made. It takes time these days. But he tells the boys there are worse shortages in other countries he's seen. And here we're better off, with a good climate and plenty to eat. Mr. Walker and Roy always leave early. They've trains to catch to get home. Commonwealth and state government housing commissions are building homes for sunshine, with enough land round them to plant a garden, and for children to play in. As a purchasing agent, John Stanley can afford to pay the full economic rent of 38 shillings a week for his new 7-roomed home. But under government policy, basic wage earners would only pay 1/5 of their family income for the same cottage. Joan and Sue are just as excited as their mother in exploring the new home, with its modern bathroom and kitchen and sunny rooms. The Stanleys plan to buy the house as soon as arrangements are made with the commission. Pat has temporary board and lodging at £2 a week with Mr. and Mrs. Drew. Mr. Drew is a cabinet maker whose hobby is building model ships. Mrs. Drew is an immigrant herself. She came from Auchmithie, Scotland in 1918. Her husband comes from Canarsie, so they both know how Pat feels in a new country and do their best to make him feel at home. As Pat doesn't work on Saturday, he can leave home early to go to the races. Mr. Drew usually gives him 10 bob to put on a horse. What do you fancy today, Mr. Drew? Cockrow? Right, 10 bob on Cockrow to win. Anybody can take a tram or train to one of Australia's many courses. Pat often took a girl with him. Not always the same one, though. He found it hard to decide which he liked the best. Not that Pat always picked the winner. And though girls he knew were nice to talk with, he didn't feel like settling down with them. Until one day he took a ferry across the harbour, from the North Shore to the city. That was when he saw Daphne. Daphne Joyce had been in the Australian Women's Army for 3.5 years. Now she was studying dress designing under the Commonwealth Rehabilitation Scheme. By the time they reached the city, Pat and Daphne were already good friends. During the weekends that followed, they spent many afternoons walking along the beaches, almost deserted in wintertime, and Daphne wondered if this was the man to whom she'd tie her future. But Pat was rather too easygoing. She told him if he'd take advantage of the rehabilitation training scheme, he could become a skilled tradesman with an assured future, and then she might consider getting married. So Pat put in his application for vocational training. He was in one of the categories of British ex-servicemen eligible under Australia's scheme for re-establishment benefits. Well, what would you like to be, Pat? What can I be? Pastry cook? Tailor? Watchmaker? Bricklayer? There are lots of other things you could be, you know. So Pat made his choice and joined the many young Australians who are learning to become skilled workers. Men from the Middle East, from Crete and Libya, fighters from New Guinea jungles, navigators, pilots, gunners, schoolboys of the Pacific. All over the country, they're learning to build their factories, their workshops, their homes. For them and for Patrick Oliver, Australia has a life and a future in the making.